Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll just get your attention. We'll get started. I think we're almost right on time, maybe 1 minute late. My name's Michael Hagan. I'm Councillor Lockyer Valley, and I have the Environment Portfolio Council. I have one other colleague of mine, Councillor Vella, here. I acknowledge him tonight. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here to this great event that we're holding in conjunction with the partners. Before we begin, I hope I got that right. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we gather today, the Yuggera and Yuggurrpul people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders of other communities who may live here as the keepers of the traditions, customs, cultures and stories of proud peoples. Tonight's event is part of the Koala Forum series initiative of social marketing at Griffith, working in partnership with local council and state government. This series aims to engage and educate the community on koala conservation happening in their local community and throughout southeast Queensland, and how we can all work together to protect this endangered species. Throughout the evening, you will hear from a variety of experts, including representatives from Lockyer Valley Regional Council, Social Marketing at Griffith, the Department of Environment and Science, Lockyer Uplands Catchment, and including University of Sunshine Coast and Urban Utilities. If you have any questions for our expert panel, we ask that you please scan the QR code provided and submit your questions using Slido. There will be time at the end of the forum for our MC for the evening, Mr. David Feshner from Social Marketing at Griffith, to field these questions to the expert panel. Once again, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. It's great to see the rooms full. I can see people from just about every north, south, west, east of the Lockyer Valley, which is good, people from every corner. So with that, I'll hand over.
Thank you so much, Councillor Hagan. So my name is David Fechner. I'm a research fellow at Griffith University, and I will be your host today. As we just heard, we have a great lineup of speakers. We have in total 6 presentations, each 15 minutes long, 3 minutes before the break and then 3 minutes after the break. And as Councillor Hagan already mentioned, we have this QR code. After each presentation, we have the same slide where you can scan the QR code and then submit your questions for the speaker you just heard. And then at the end, we have a panel discussion to discuss your questions. All right, so now it's time for our first 2 speakers, René Sternberg, who's a senior environmental planner at the Lockyer Valley Regional Council, and Chris Hoffman, who's a catchment project officer also at Lockyer Valley Regional Council. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and a big thank you to Social Marketing at Griffith for organising tonight, and thank you for inviting us to speak. It's so great to see so many people here. It's much better turnout than what we were expecting. So Chris and I are proud to outline the koala conservation measures that the Lockyer Valley Regional Council are currently undertaking to work towards the South East Queensland Koala Conservation Plan targets of stabilising koala numbers, achieving a net gain in koala habitat, restoring koala habitat and reducing the threats to koalas. The Lockyer Valley Regional Council have a small team of 6 environment staff across 2 different departments. So as David mentioned, I'm a senior environmental planner. I work alongside other strategic planners on planning scheme policies, development applications and some grant funded projects where we're successful with them. And Chris is our catchment project officer. So his position is partly funded through the Resilient Rivers Initiative, which he is responsible for delivering projects through. These projects are focused on improving catchment health through slowing the flow of water and keeping soil in the Lockyer. And a lot of those projects include revegetation. Chris also collaborates closely with community environmental groups, universities and Healthy Land and Water on catchment projects. Martin is our Land for Wildlife officer and overall expert in all things environment. His wealth of local knowledge is unmatched, which is why the demand for our Land for Wildlife program is so high. And Cara is our Senior Environmental Project Officer, She started with council just last year, and her position is wholly funded through the Black Summer Bushfire Recovery Grant until March next year. Her position is wholly funded through, her role is to write management plans and deliver on-ground actions on 16 of our council-managed reserves. And then we have Steve and Tracy, who are very busy pest management officers. So they deliver council's biosecurity plan through a wide range of landholder education, incentives and compliance programs, as well as managing pests and weeds on council-managed land. We all enjoy engaging with the community to help build their capacity and knowledge to care for our environment, because we all recognise how important private landholders are in achieving conservation outcomes. The Environment Strategy is our head of power and outlines Council's environmental direction over a 5-year period. There are a number of strategic priorities that align with the South East Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy and deliver conservation outcomes for koalas through planning and policy, research and collaboration, community education, community incentives, pest management, and managing council land. So in terms of planning and policy and compliance work, staff at council have been working really hard to draft a new modern planning scheme. The draft planning scheme will bring our 3 current planning schemes up to date with current best practices and state planning policies. It will also improve the provisions for wildlife habitat conservation and wildlife safety through a biodiversity overlay code and associated planning scheme policies. It's anticipated that the draft Lockyer Valley planning scheme will be advertised for community consultation at some point this June. Since 2020, I've been more involved in assessing development applications and trying to improve the environmental outcomes of development in the Lockyer Valley by ensuring large developments in wildlife habitat retain connectivity and mitigate wildlife injury by installing fauna infrastructure and wildlife-proof fencing. We now also assist with compliance investigations for illegal vegetation clearing and erosion and sediment control issues. And we're constantly reviewing state and federal legislation and advocating for improvements through the Local Government Association of Queensland and our local government Koala Working Group.
We work closely with a range of stakeholders to support koala research, including Health of Land and Water, their grant-funded projects, including the release of jewel beetles to control cat squirrel creeper and the koala detection dog surveys. The Department of Environment and Science Koala Research Team, we've supported them by suggesting locations to target for koala survey and to assist in organising access onto properties, including the council reserves, where they've done several surveys, successful surveys. We support the citizen science groups such as Lockyer Upland Catchment, Lucy, and the Lockyer Community Action Incorporated by providing letters of support for grant applications, advice on research methods, and access to council managed land for on-ground activities. Both these groups do an amazing job in monitoring koala populations and habitat use throughout the Lockyer Valley region. We loan fauna cameras for koala monitoring through the Land for Wildlife program. We actively promote Griffith University's Citizen Science Koala Research Project, which encourages citizens to post koala scats to Griffith University, who then run DNA analysis on them to better understand koala movements and family relationships. It's a really important project. As well as the University of Queensland through their student projects, including the Matahari Pest Animal Control Project and research in Dwyer Scrub Conservation Park. We participate actively in the Little Liverpool Range Initiative and the Great Eastern Ranges Initiative, which run a variety of collaborative wide-scale research and planning projects as well as on-ground activities. And we encourage citizens to record their own koala sightings on iNaturalist or the Q Wildlife app.
In terms of community education, we really try and raise koala awareness by collaborating with social marketing at Griffith team to provide consistent awareness and education materials across the whole of South East Queensland. So this Koala Forum is one such example. We also connect with the community and raise awareness of the threats of koalas and provide information on how the community can help via education displays and presentations. For example, we attended the Hatton Vale State School Christmas markets last year alongside social marketing at Griffith, And our Australia Day award ceremony this year was koala themed. So we had Professor Peter Timms, who you'll hear from later tonight, as our keynote speaker. We had a kids poster competition, which you may have seen when we're having pre-food, and education displays by council, social marketing at Griffith, and Trish Lahong, one of our wildlife carers who's here tonight. I've seen her around. And we also provided some free trees for the community. And just this month, we provided a presentation to Year 6 students at Peace Lutheran Primary School as part of their curriculum on conservation and endangered species. We're constantly aware that good land management benefits the environment as a whole, but also koala habitat and koala populations. So we actively seek grant funding opportunities to run workshops and provide incentives to educate the community on best practice land management techniques, including regenerative agriculture, cultural burning workshops, and weed management. We also collaborate closely with Healthy Land and Water and support workshops and programs that they run within the Lockyer Valley. Council also run a range of community incentives, including the annual Community Environmental Grants program, which is open to schools and community groups to undertake environmental projects involving education, management, and conservation of the natural environment. It's also open to local wildlife carers. Applicants are able to apply for up to $5,000 for each grant, and for example, one of the grants a few years back was awarded to Lockyer Community Action Inc. to purchase wildlife cameras and host workshops to improve wildlife monitoring by citizens. As I mentioned, we also have an extremely knowledgeable ecologist who runs our Land for Wildlife program, and it aims to enhance the ecological values on private property. So participants are able to receive a property assessment and and get advice on how to enhance the environmental values of their property. They're also able to access the fauna monitoring cameras and our annual free tree program, as well as monthly newsletters from the Southeast Queensland Land for Wildlife program and workshops. Currently in the Lockyer Valley, there's 16,700 hectares under Land for Wildlife across 190 registered Land for Wildlife properties and another 27 working towards.
Pest and weed management. Council provide a wide range of landholder education and incentive programs for both pest and weed animal control. Pest and weed control. Pest animals such as feral dogs can prey on koalas, and feral pigs and deer can disturb regenerating forest when introduced weeds. Weeds such as lantana and climbing vines can easily choke out regenerating koala habitat and make it difficult for koalas to move through the forest, access food trees, and change the ecology of those areas. Council pest officers can visit your property and help write a property pest management plan. This plan then entitles the residents to the Resident Herbicide Subsidy Program, which provides a 50% herbicide subsidy for 16 listed priority restricted weeds. We also have spray equipment, including spray trailers, available to loan, as well as dog, fox, pig, cat, and rabbit trap loans. We also offer the landowner invasive animal control subsidy program, which enables residents up to a 50% rebate on specific feral animal baits and a wild dog scalp bounty. On top of this, council pest officers can assist with managing weeds and pest animals on council managed reserves and often run community education workshops to raise awareness. Managing council land. Council owns and manages a variety of parcels of land, some of which are now managed for conservation purposes, and it's a significant estate that we currently manage. Within these parcels, we manage weeds and pest animals, manage the bushfire risk through cultural and ecological burns, undertake restoration by replanting habitat native to the area, and collaborate with researchers, private entities, First Nation groups, and university groups to undertake research and education on the land. In 2021, Council was awarded funding through the federal government Black Summer Bushfire Recovery Program to write management plans and undertake on-ground management activities on 16 of the council managed reserves. And over the past 18 months, we've collaborated with the Toowoomba Wilderness Society on a site up at Withcott, Shawlands Drive, where 500 koala food trees have been planted and are being managed by the Wilderness Society that in time will provide food for koalas in care. And we also work with the Nature Refuge program on a nature refuge that Council owns called Alice Creek Nature Reserve. And on that site, we've been doing lantana management as well as some wild dog control. So the other programs that I primarily work with is the Resilient Rivers Initiative, which has been established and funded by the Council of Mayors, South East Queensland. This initiative aims to improve the health of South East Queensland's waterways by delivering a coordinated approach to catchment management. The aims of the Resilient Rivers Initiative are to stabilise riparian areas through erosion prevention and restoring creek bank habitat, which in the Lockyer Valley is primarily core koala habitat. Through this program, Council have planted over 20,000 koala habitat and feed trees within the past 4 years. Our priority areas are on the Lockyer Creek, around the Gatton area, and also up in the Tent Hill catchment. We've recently planted 3,000 native trees at a council reserve in Placid Hills, and we ran a successful community tree planting event recently at that site, which 1,200 plants were installed. This was being done in conjunction with Greening Australia, who's partnered with the Resilient Rivers Initiative to restore an endangered regional ecosystem that supports koalas in that local area. And like I said, we run several community tree planting days, which give the community an opportunity to get their hands dirty and do something positive for the local environment. And finally, we will work closely with local schools to help clean up the waterways, undertake water quality testing, and to be planting some trees.
So how can you help us help koalas? There's heaps of things you can do. You can tell your neighbours when you spot a koala in the street or the suburb and help spread awareness in your community. You can register koala sightings on the iNaturalist or the Q Wildlife app. When you're driving at dusk, dawn or night, slow down and watch out for koalas on the move, especially during the breeding season between July and January. Be careful around corners and crests in areas with roadside vegetation. And if you see a wildlife on the road, slow down, sound your horn and dim your lights. Make sure that your backyard is koala friendly by having a rope in your pool and leaning a post up against your fence to allow koalas to escape more easily. Keep your dog contained at night, either in a kennel or inside the house, and always walk your dog on a leash. You can learn more about training your dog to avoid wildlife through social marketing at Griffith's Leader program, which you'll hear more about from David later tonight. And you can support our local koala carers. You can volunteer with them, donate towels and blankets or funds from your Containers for Change. Attend a community tree planting event. Join Land for Wildlife. If you've got room on your property, you can plant some koala food trees. Join your local catchment groups such as the Lockyer Uplands catchment, who you'll be hearing from next, or the Lockyer Community Action Inc., and participate in koala surveys that they're doing. And there's also a number of other community environmental groups here tonight, including Ipswich Koala Protection Society and Toowoomba Wilderness Society. You can follow Wildlife Watcher and Furry Friends on socials and visit our website to learn more. But most importantly, you need to know who to call if you find a sick or injured koala or wildlife. So we've piggybacked off Logan City Council's idea and created a QR code which links to a contact card. So when you scan this QR code with your phone, it'll download the contact card onto your phone with all of the local carers' phone numbers on there directly. And it also has a link to our website, so you can find out some more information there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renee and Chris, for this very comprehensive overview of the work that the Council is doing to conserve koalas and accepting the challenge to summarize everything in 15 minutes. I appreciate that that is quite the challenge. If you weren't able to scan the QR code before, don't worry. All the slides will be available to you after tonight, as well as you may have noticed we have cameras in the background. It's not only to live stream it, but also to provide recordings to you after tonight. All right. Any questions you may have for Renee and Chris, please feel free to scan this QR code and submit your questions via Slido. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Diane Guthrie, who's the president of the Lockyer Uplands Catchment Inc., or also known as Lucy. And as president of Lucy, Diane has been leading the charge in the landholder-led conservation of koala habitat in the western Lockyer Uplands. And Diane brings her expertise in government community engagement to advocate for greater recognition and support for private landholders' contribution to biodiversity conservation. And today she will share some of the innovative approaches of Lucy to evaluate and monitor koala habitat. Welcome.
Well, good evening, and thanks to the organisers for the invitation to speak on behalf of our group. As David said, I'll be talking about landholder-led conservation or koala conservation in the Western Lockyer, and specifically the work of Lucy, which is an association of landholders. We are mostly located in the geographical arc to the west of the Lockyer region. And I'm here speaking as a landholder, that's my expertise, as well as on behalf of our group of landholders as their president. But my expertise is on the ground as a landholder. Now I've got a no clicker here, so button. So I'd like to start with some context about Lucy in terms of our location and our approach, because that frames the way we approach our activities. So we commenced in 2015 under the name of Friends of Dwyer's Scrub as a weeding group in our local conservation park, which is about 33 kilometres southwest of Gatton itself. It became very obvious to us in that very first year that the viability of that park and all its species, flora and fauna, was totally dependent on the landscape around it. For both species movement, seed dispersal, we're also aware that weeds move across borders, as do feral pests and so forth. So our work in the scrub, the Dwyer's Scrub, was going to be successful if we could engage the landscape around us. So the health of the park depends on enhancing and restoring natural connections in the landscape. Just so happens at that time, through searching, Googling and so forth about how we could approach this, we came across thinking around connectivity conservation, which is considered best practice, and very roughly speaking, the bigger the tract of habitat, the more connected the habitat, the greater chance of viability of species within those tracts. So our mission was to connect tracts through connecting landholders, and our aspiration is to keep continuing to expand that association of landholders. And at the same time, we came across one of the lead practitioner organisations in connectivity conservation in Australia, the Great Eastern Ranges Initiative. We sought and were successful in partnership in that organisation. So that's something that we're quite proud of. Just to give you an idea of our location, as I said, we're in an arc in the west of the Lockyer Valley where our activities occur and most of our members are located. We're actually part of a state recognised biodiversity corridor and a corridor of significant vegetation. So obviously that gives us a whole lot of leverage for when we seek assistance, that it's a recognised corridor. So when we were reaching out to landholders, we wanted to move beyond just trying to get people to engage in a corridor agenda. So we had to find some hooks, some lures to get people involved. It became quite obvious quite quickly, the more that we talked about it, that actually landholders in that geographical area had some favourite critters. The glossy black cockatoo koala and the black-breasted button quail, all threatened species, all present on a number of our landholders' properties. Recently, we've added the Birds of the Lockyer Uplands Conservation Action Plan, which is, we have Great Eastern Rangers and BirdLife Australia sponsoring us in that, and that will add the temperate woodland bird species to our flagship species of interest. So we'll be rolling that program out over the next so many years. Let's just go specifically now to koalas and our work with koalas. Let's put the context up there. We are also, as of recent government mapping, in core koala habitat. So that overlays the regional biodiversity corridor, as well as significant vegetation. And more specifically up close, that's our area of interest there. But we have aspirations to operate from the main range to Halidon Hills. That's our aspiration, big sky thinking. So we're open to collaborations across that corridor. So koala presence in the Lockyer Valley. If we go via the WildNet records, contributed by various groups and individuals, Lockyer Community Action Inc., main people representing that group are there who have contributed a significant number of those pink dots. The pink dots are koala. And you'll notice up in the Lockyer National Park area, the very kind of systematic dots. That was the result of a regularised grid survey that was conducted about 7 years ago, something like that. And so as well as our group, there are other researchers and individuals who contribute those records. Some of the records are the result of opportunistic sightings. As I said, some are from surveys. And where we are, it's important to bear in mind that the records there, as well as in some of the other areas, are indicative. It's not representative. It's not the result of a regularised grid survey in a particular area. It's more opportunistic than that. So koala presence could be a lot more than what we're putting up there. So let's look specifically at what we've been doing with our landholders. We have lots of historical, or did have lots of historical anecdotal accounts of koalas in the landscape. In fact, one of our members who was born and raised in the landscape said, as he used to ride his horse to school, there were always koalas in the trees. So, and I do remember with the Ipswich Forum, the counterpart to this forum, one of the speakers there said that we're probably still experiencing, or koalas are still experiencing, the ramifications rattling down the decades of the skin trade. So what he experienced when he was growing up may be something that, has been impacted by that still rattling down the decades, as well as clearing and so on and so forth. So what we had to do, if we were going to get the assistance and the attention we needed for our work, we needed to get evidence. We needed to build an evidence base. So we started our monitoring program. Our primary goal was to confirm presence. That's what we had to do first. So we enlisted 16 properties and we surveyed them more than once. And those property sizes they're all bush blocks. They range from 30 acres to 200 acres, so quite large blocks, some of them. We did targeted scat walks or random scat walks looking for likely feed tree areas, and or combined that with the spot assessment technique that Phillips and Cullenham developed, and we can talk about that later, not here. So we've done the targeted scat walks on all 16 properties. We did the spot assessment technique on 6 of those properties, and I'll explain why in a minute. And we found evidence on 13 of the 16, which is substantial. So why did we do 6 SAT surveys? If I can get this to move. I should also, before I go on with that, I'll also say our second goal was to assess habitat condition. We are a group about habitat management. Our catchphrase is caring for native habitats. We're landholders, we're not academics, we're not researchers, we're about caring for what we've got to keep the koalas there. So the work that we did, and it's all voluntary, it had to be of direct relevance and utility for landholders. So when we were doing this monitoring, we also wanted to look at the habitat condition, provide the landholders with feedback, and importantly for our group, how do we go forward with our connectivity planning? So we combined our targeted scat walks and our SAT surveys with habitat assessment using the Queensland Government endorsed assessment manual that developed by QTFN, and use that on the same 16 properties. Well, our plan was to apply it to the same 16, along with the SAT that I talked about before, the spot assessment technique. After 6 of the properties, we paused. We had thought to question what were we doing with all this data we were collecting. If you're aware of what the detail in the SAT methodology is, there's quite a bit of data that's collected through that process. Same with this. It's very complicated. It's written in a language that is not really accessible to landholders. And we questioned the utility of that to the information we were gathering to the landholder. How was this helping them conserve their vegetation? They knew there were koalas there. Well, what do I do about that? And also, we were thinking these bioregional land benchmarks and attributes weren't really fitting what we were coming across in the landscape. So we only did 6. We kept up the targeted scat walks on the 16 properties, but we abandoned the other 2 methodologies after 6. So just very briefly, at the same time, I also came across this review, which was a godsend really, because it actually was confirming what we were finding, that in fact there's a lot of uncertainty, if no evidence, for some of the predictors of what makes quality koala habitat or koala habitat at all. So when it comes to soil fertility and relationship to nutritional value of tree, density of tree composition, size of trees, whole range of attributes were not good predictors at all. It varied so much and should always be qualified by finer scale feedback and research. And that was great for us. So what we said then, well, just to show you a little bit, the regional benchmarks, you know, there was a benchmark for canopy cover, benchmark for what the size of the tree stems should be as to what it makes for good koala habitat. Well, we were finding it wasn't like that at all. Using those benchmarks was telling us that the habitat we were assessing was actually not quality, but we knew that the koalas were there. So, and the same with what was listed for the Lockyer as primary and secondary food trees. Well, there's no strong evidence for that either. So we were finding that wasn't the case, that was the primary and they were the secondary. So what we then did was, and I must also acknowledge, we had a lot of assistance from Chris and from Martin, but our little group of landholders decided to develop our own koala habitat assessment methodology that had to be based on grounded knowledge, and it's still a work in progress. We've only based it on 16 properties. It had to have utility at the property scale. It couldn't be complex in language that wasn't accessible. It would have to be something that the landholders themselves could use to monitor what in their land management. And it also had to allow us, the group, to plan across the landscape. So it had to give different levels of information, but be accessible and be landholder friendly. So we developed our LCAT. And what we still base it on an assessment plot, 1 minute ago. We still base it on an assessment plot, a 25-metre radius circle plot, purely arbitrary. It could still be 50 by 50 if you wanted it to be. We emphasise the presence and recruitment of the seven big species that we kept coming across. Surprisingly, yellow box and 4 ironbarks figured in the big 7. We allowed for other tree species to be noted and so forth. But if you're interested, I've got a copy of that here. We can go through all the parameters that we've included. We also included a modified spot assessment technique. They should read SAT survey on the back of it. But we don't go to the same extent as the Phillips model or any other model or modified model, because landholders don't want to know what the DBH is of 30 trees in the plot. They just want to know, if those 7, the big 7 are still there or not there or whatever, are they being used and so forth. So it's a very cut down SAT to go with that. So far we've done, it's actually 3 trial runs with the LCAT, mainly for us, the little team that goes out and does it with the landholder. It worked really well. It's easy to use, it's quick. It's like a rapid habitat assessment. But we did try to get a grant to pilot it last year, weren't successful. We'll keep trying. So, where we're at, we want to extend our presence database, just yes, no, is it there? We want to trial the utility of the LCAT with landholders. Do they find it useful? Is it meeting our criteria? We welcome researchers, other institutions to collaborate with us. We've had that in the past and we continue to invite that, and I think we've got University of Sunshine Coast coming next month with detection dogs or something. So, and our Great Eastern Rangers partners are bringing some projects to us in the next year or so around koala, so we're open to lots of collaboration. We need help with weeds. They're our biggest challenge. It's not so much feral animals or domestic dogs, it's weeds. Weeds. And I won't go out through the rest of basically promoting what we do, getting people to register their sightings, so on and so forth. So that's a landholder-driven approach. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Diane, for sharing your landholder-driven approach. Any questions you may have for Diane, please scan the QR code and submit your questions via Slido. I'm next up. So I will talk a little bit about the work that we do at social marketing at Griffith. And I do this by addressing those 4 main points. So I will talk a little bit about the main reasons why koalas are being hospitalized in Southeast Queensland and here in Lockyer Valley, how we can identify sick koalas, how we can reduce vehicle strikes, and how we can reduce dog and koala interactions. So just to get started, a little bit of an overview of the main reasons why koalas are being hospitalized. This data comes from the Queensland government, so it's available to each and every one of you. If you just Google koala hospital data, you will come to this website. So here I summarized the number of koalas that were hospitalized based on diseases between 2016 and August 2022. So the first number, 35, just relates to the Lockyer Valley. and then 3,176 is for Southeast Queensland. Yeah, so diseases, number one, not only in Lockyer Valley, but also overall in Southeast Queensland. Second number, vehicle strikes, and it's not a big surprise that the main strikes occur along the highway. And then, so we have 24 in this time frame in Lockyer Valley, and then just above 1,700 in Southeast Queensland. And the last, third one, dog attacks, 17 here in Lockyer Valley, and 468 overall in Southeast Queensland. So now I talk a little based on those reasons. I will talk you through the work that we have been doing to try to prevent some of those occurrences from happening. So first one, to prevent diseases, one of the ways how we can prevent koalas from being hospitalized or dying from diseases is by spotting them and submitting them. But in order to do that, we actually need to know how we can identify a sick koala. So here's a question for you. Is this a sick or a healthy koala? Who says it's a sick one? Is it a healthy one? Healthy? Healthy. How about this one? Sick one? Who says sick? All right, nice. What about this fella? What's it? Is it sick one? Healthy? Healthy? Great. All right, that's an easy one. So I think we have a little bit of a biased sample here because you all did pretty good. So we did the same exercise with a couple of more pictures with more than 2,000 people in Southeast Queensland. Anyone wants to guess how many percentage were able to identify a sick koala out of those 2,000 people? 35? 25? Did you look at my slides? Wow, that's remarkable. So we're 26%. So that's obviously a problem because we have this huge gap. On the one hand, we need to submit koala sightings and need to identify if they are sick or healthy to prevent koalas from being hospitalized because of diseases. But then we don't really know how to do this. So that's a problem that we wanted to tackle. And how we do this is we call it co-design sessions. So we get basically community members into a room and ask them for their opinions, how they would like to be engaged with. So, for example, we review how other people have engaged previously community members, then ask, for example, members from, I don't know, Lockyer Valley or Logan City Council or Redland, what they like about previous campaigns, and ask them to come up with their own campaigns. And as a result, we created a campaign that was then launched through different online and offline channels. So first of all, obviously the campaign needed to educate residents on how to spot a sick koala. So what are the key signs? And then also tell them how they can submit them. So either they can ring a hotline or they can submit them via the apps that we have heard earlier today. Yeah, here's a post that we did through our Wildlife Watcher account. So this is kind of how we activate then the campaigns. All right, next challenge we wanted to tackle is to reduce vehicle strikes. And you may have guessed how we started. We got people into a room and asked them about previous campaigns that were run in different council areas, and ask them what they like about the campaign, what they dislike, and what could be done better. So you get the idea. It's basically trying to get community members to create campaigns that they actually would like to see, so they can engage with them. Yeah, so it was a little bit of a fun. They wanted a little bit of a funny campaign. So we played on the Bachelor theme that was obviously very popular a couple of years ago, and was specifically during breeding season when koalas obviously are more on the move, and again on our socials. We also activate those campaigns through events. So we said or heard earlier, we were active here at the Lockyer Valley Christmas Market last year, where we have our stand where we showcase how people can protect koalas. This one was specifically done in the Redlands, so it's different variable message signs. So depending on your speed, you will get a certain message. So either you get a smiley face, you get a neutral face, or you get a bit of an angry face. And it does work, yeah. So it reduces the speed people are driving, and afterwards in our surveys, people were able to recall them and said, you know, they really made me slow down. So this is, as you have seen today, the event is run by Wildlife Watcher, which is an arm of social marketing at Griffith. We have a website, we have socials, so please feel free to follow us there. And the last one that I wanted to touch on briefly is how we can reduce dog and koala interactions. So this one was the first program we launched a couple of years ago. We call it Leave It, which is a dog training program. So it builds on traditional dog training approaches. So how to train a dog to stay or not to bark or to come back when called. And what we did in collaboration with dog trainers is to add a component to basically leave wildlife alone when being told to do so. We activate it through different channels. So you can see it's online and offline. So through we have a designated Facebook and Instagram page called Furry Friends. If you like to see cute but very educative content, please feel free to follow Furry Friends. We have a newsletter, we have a website, training events, and Dog Fest, which I will talk about in a minute. So the key to success with this program is obviously to get dog trainers involved, because we can't educate all the dog owners in Southeast Queensland. So what we decided to do is to collaborate with Steve Austin, who's an expert in wildlife avoidance dog training, and get him actually to teach dog trainers how they can teach dog owners to leave their dog, to leave wildlife alone. Last year we launched our Leave It app. Again, if we have any dog owners here, feel free to download it, check it out. It has different tutorials, how you can teach your dog to stay, to recall, and obviously to leave wildlife alone. And our Dog Fest, which was the result of working with dog owners on how they would like to learn about how they can teach their dog to leave wildlife alone. And they said they want something, you know, which is fun. And what we decided to create is Dog Fest, which is it's a one-day event. It's all about dogs. It's kind of a dog market, if you want to. But what we do then is we embed dog training within this family-friendly event. As I said, if you're after cute and educative content, feel free to follow our Furry Friends account. And just to wrap it up, it's a bit of a repetition what we heard earlier already. Things you can do to protect koalas now. Learn the science of a sick koala and learn where you can submit them. Drive slowly in wildlife zones, especially during breeding season. Train your dog in wildlife avoidance and keep them in a koala safe spot during night. Make your backyard koala safe. What we heard, put a pole over your fence, for example, and obviously visit our Wildlife Watcher account and follow us on our socials to learn more about how you can protect koalas. So we have a break now for 10 minutes. Please feel free during those 10 minutes. There's still refreshments in the other room. You also found a little QR code on your seat, which is which takes you to our annual koala survey, where you are invited to share what you think about the koala conservation activities that were done in your local city council. but also more broadly what you do to protect koalas. So I will see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you. We will move on to the next speaker for tonight, which is Cameron Jackson, who is a future specialist environment water quality at Urban Utilities. Cameron will be discussing an innovative project that is creating new koala habitat in Helidon using recycled water. This exciting initiative is helping to enhance biodiversity conservation in the Lockyer Valley region. Cameron has over 30 years experience in water sector and is passionate about sustainability and environmental conservation. Please welcome Cameron.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to come tonight and give you a little bit of an update on a project that Urban Utilities is doing out at Helidon. So the title of the discussion tonight is around how can we use water recycling from our sewage treatment plant at Helidon to create some koala habitat. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Moa, Brisbane River catchment and Quandamooka, Moreton Bay and its catchments. So in recognising past, present and emerging elders, we honour our traditional owners' deep cultural connection to and unique ability to care for sea and country. We are committed to partnering meaningfully with traditional owners and Aboriginal peoples to support the protection and remediation of sea and country, to honour their cultural practices and to support the future aspirations. So the project background is around about 2015. Well, prior to that, our sewage treatment plant at Helidon, which is in the purple corner on Back Flagstone Road, it services the township of Helidon. We have 5 sewage treatment plants in the Lockyer catchment, and Urban Utilities covers water and sewage services for Brisbane, Ipswich, Somerset, Lockyer Valley and Scenic Rim councils. So historically, the farm where it says Urban Utilities Farm was owned by somebody else, and the sewage treatment plant used to pump into that turkey dam down the bottom right there, and he used it for irrigation of the farm for many, many years. When he retired in 2017, we thought what a great idea for us to buy this land. So water utilities like to own land around their STPs just for odour buffer controls, and just gives us flexibility of operation and those types of things, noise as well. And then we got the farm, and then we thought, okay, well, what are we going to do with it? You can see in the red there, there's obviously some conservation forest not too far away or adjoining. So we took to the planning department. Now we're a big engineering company, so as one of the few scientists in there, we thought, how can we convince the engineering to plant some trees, which is a challenge in itself. The plant's only small, it's about 1,000 EP, 1,000 people. So we had about 20 megalitres. So the aim of what we wanted to do, we had to use that water on the land. We don't discharge to the creek system up there. Our operators said, well, if you're going to do the farm, then it has to be low OPEX, of course. And the location of the farm meant that we had some opportunity to do a biodiversity aspect, which we hadn't done really before. So we went into irrigation and crop selection. Now we said we could go do farming. We're not farmers, so we needed a land management option that was going to be non-intensive. And so we started looking at could we recreate regional ecosystem 1233, which was the endangered species, ecosystem for that area. So we went around and said, okay, let's do some soil sampling. Let's have a look at biodiversity values, and we'll design an agroforestry. So really what we had to do is use the water first and then see what we could come up to establish some biodiversity outcomes. Department of Environment, has a model for effluent disposal. It's called MEDLI. It stands for Model for Effluent Disposal by Land Irrigation. So as a regulated water provider, we have to ensure that we comply with making sure that if we're going to irrigate this water for 20 or 30 years on this forest, we can't destroy the soil. And so that's what we have to comply with. And we also thought, well, this could be a good opportunity for advanced offsets. So recreating koala habitat as well as regional ecosystem 1233. And so we went through the process of business case, and luckily our management was supportive. We had an environmental leadership strategy approved in 2017-18, and this one was a good project to dip our toe in the water. How do we do green infrastructure, and how do we start ticking some of these sustainability boxes that we're starting to talk about with a bit more fervour? All right, let's go to an expert. So Bill Ellis from the Koala Ecology Group. So we better get him out there and see there's actually koalas in that forest adjacent to our farm. And so Bill went out there back in September 2019 and basically gave us a very encouraging report in relation to the presence of koalas, plenty of scats, and said, yep, this project's probably a goer for a biodiversity project. I think that circle has moved. That scat has moved since I took that photo, which is unbelievable. Okay, so we found plenty of scats. Those pins are where we found them, and I think the green were actual koala sightings. And the 7 hectare forest that we're going to recreate on cleared farmland was nestled down into that corner along Waterholes Creek with good connectivity to that 100 hectare conservation forest across the creek. So the grand plan that got through was we need a 25-year of irrigation. So the Medley model sort of indicated that we built a new Medley model for eucalypts that the state government now has, I think, as part of their Medley suite. And it sort of said that you can irrigate these trees for about 25 years, which was pretty good. And then we would naturalise the forest. So it sort of moves from an agroforestry looking, all in rows, designed to use the recycled water. And then we would replicate the 7 hectares next door. We've got about 30 hectares of good cleared land. And then we can thin out the forest and just naturalise it over time. So that was the grand plan. And so we designed it. So over here on left-hand side is really what was happening before we purchased the property. So we built a little recycled water treatment plant, which was really just some pumps and filters, into a big tank, pump shed, and then we designed a irrigation. And so we put in originally 1,600 blue gums and some ironbark and Mort Bay ash. And each tree had its own little irrigation. So with Medley, the aim is to spread the water as evenly as possible over the whole site. So we had little sprinklers on each. They'd throw about 5 metres. And we automated the system to be fully automatic. So we pump the water into the tank, it fills, triggers the pump, and it does a hectare spray. It puts on about an inch of rain a time, and then it selectively goes through the 7 hectare blocks, giving an inch of rain on each block, generally about once a month. When we planted in 2019, it was the driest year on record here in the Lockyer. You probably remember it. You would have sweated a lot. And I think October, November was probably the worst time to plant in the last 150 years. But we did it. It was like when we dug the holes, it was like digging into one big brick, a 4 hectare brick. But, we got good foresters on board. We spot cultivated the trees. We put plenty of water in there. We planted, and then we had them go. So they were a bit slow growing, but they've really appreciated a few seasons of La Nina. But with a bit of wet weather, we got more flows into the plant, so we needed some more plantation. And so we built another 3 hectares, which we planted in October last year. This photo shows the new trees that were put in in October, and you can see the irrigation system sort of operating quite nicely. And in the background is the 3.5-year-old or 3-year-old trees. So they've grown quite well. We've been using, gives us a bit of accommodation for growth, so we can put a bit more water on the trees. They're a bit conservative with the water irrigation at the moment. And we use ag requirements from in here at Gatton who built the irrigation system, and they come out and do the maintenance for us. So at the moment we've got pretty good 7 hectares of healthy young trees that can hopefully grow into koala habitat. And we're seeing a few positive externalities from the project. So yes, we're getting our core water use. The trees are growing well, and hopefully they can grow into a home for koalas. But we had some good support from Lockyer Valley Regional Council. So Chris and his team come out and did a bit of early wild dog and fauna surveys and helped us with weed management locally. We've certainly minimised the treated effluent to the creek. We're getting that 1233, the endangered ecosystem, recreated there. It does trim off a little bit of carbon as well. So under the federal government carbon, it looks as though that Halidon STP is likely to be carbon neutral from the offsets. We haven't formally claimed them, but we can use them in our corporate reporting. And really for us as a proof of concept, because we've got 18 small treatment plants that service small townships in those 3 regional council areas. So this was a bit of a trial around, can we actually start growing koala habitat in many places? And how do we do it? So a lot of science, when we do these, we want to try and make it science-based. So you can see some of the measurements that we're taking in some of at the top right, around over the plantings, the tree height, the diameter at ground level, and the diameter at breast height of the trees in our 2 plots. And we've developed that medley model to make sure the sustainable irrigation. And later on, we might actually take some samples from the trunk and the leaves and make sure that the nutrient balance that we thought would happen would be occurring. And we can do integrated silviculture and irrigation methodology, and it seems to work quite well as long as you're using experts. That little picture there is, Tony Constantini is over here, has helped us with the project from day one, used to be in SEQ catchments. We had to took this tree out for a particular reason, but you can see after 5 months you've got sort of probably at least 700 or 800 mil of root. So really the concept was, we have the plantings established there. It's along the creek. It's got good connectivity. We know that the trees across the creek have koalas in them and beside our property. So hopefully we've created something that can grow into a successful koala habitat. And we just need to wait and care for the land. We've got the foresters still contracted to work there till 2027 to do the weeding, to do watering if it's required. And it's looking good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for this presentation. Any questions? Again, please feel free to scan the QR code and send the questions through Slido. We will now try a second go and see if we get a proper audio going.
I'm going to jump into the slides where we're talking about vaccination being one possible solution. And I'm going to go through these slides talking about the vaccine that we've been developing based at the University of the Sunshine Coast. I'm aware that there's other efforts around, but we feel pretty confident that we're moving ahead positively here. I just mentioned briefly that it's probably a combination of vaccines. For koalas that are completely healthy with no chlamydia, the vaccine hopefully will stop them getting infected, although that's very difficult. The koalas that are infected will be trying to use the vaccine to reduce their infection levels and also to reduce the chance that they go on from being infected to diseased. And then finally, we're hopeful, and we've got some promising results, that animals that have already got disease that vaccination may actually be able to reverse that disease to some extent. And our best results there are with ocular disease. I'll do this very quickly, given that we've sort of squeezing for time. The vaccine has 6 components to it. I'll give you a little bit of science, and I apologize for that. 6 components. There's the chlamydial components. There's 3 of them, a bit like the flu vaccine or the COVID vaccine, 3 different strains. And the other part of it is the adjuvant component, which also has 3 different components. And the adjuvant we've chosen is pretty clever in lots of ways, and it allows us to do a single dose vaccination. That's practically a pretty useful thing, and we feel like it's got some advantages, this 6 vaccine component. I'll just run through some trials we've done in the past and get to the end where we're starting to analyze the level of protection. And some of these trials are in captive animals from places like Australia Zoo and Koala Lone Pine, wildlife hospitals, but also wild populations. We work with people, including people like John Hanger, but others in wild populations. So this is just a timeline, and I won't spend too much time on it, just to show you that we've been doing a series of trials, fairly controlled, starting back in 2010, looking at a range of things, different antigens, captive animals, wild animals, infected animals, and so on. And you see the next slide looks the same, but it's yet another series of 5 more slides looking at, again, different things, combining different strains of the antigen, looking at animals with disease, without disease. And some of these are longitudinal studies, quite complicated and expensive at that point. And I'll just mention, a couple of years ago, we tried to simplify the vaccine and make it into a peptide vaccine, a very short version. It looks like that's not going to be as successful as a recombinant protein vaccine, which is what we focused all our energies on, and that's the one that we're moving through to the next stage. I'm not going to spend too much time here, again, for time, but we have a bit of an understanding, at least, of the different immune mechanisms that are going on in koalas that might be related to their vaccine response and how that might relate to their protection. But that's not what I want to focus on tonight, is talk to you about a couple of the trials and how we feel that we're getting a degree of protection in these vaccinated animals. So this is one showing chlamydial infection. So if you go across to the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the vaccinated group 5% and the unvaccinated group 29%. So this means that animals that were infected 6 months after they've been vaccinated in this wild population, 29% of the unvaccinated group were infected, but only 5% of the vaccinated koalas were infected. So clearly that's statistically very sound. And the next column on the right, 278 versus 5,938, just shows you that the level of infection is much, much lower in those vaccinated animals than in those that are not. So that shows that we have an incidence of infection decreased by about 82%. So a pretty significant, I think, effect of the vaccine in that particular trial. There's some slides. The next one is talking about progression to disease. So not just whether they're infected, but they're going to get disease. And here we have the unvaccinated animals getting as much as 24%. And the results we give you are all sorts of disease. And so it's a conservative estimate down the bottom that says we get at least a 42% reduction in disease across this period of time using the vaccine. Very quickly, I'll mention the trial we did. I think was a pretty nice trial in animals that already had eye disease. There's only 7 animals in this trial because we had to choose animals that had eye disease but no urogenital tract disease, because what we did is we stopped giving them antibiotics. And so we graded them. And what I'm going to show you here is across a period of weeks, each one of these is a different koala, and the eyes are graded for their clinical disease. So in A, for instance, it shows you that the animals actually got a little bit worse for a week or 2 because vaccines take a couple of weeks to start doing their work. But then you can see that the green line from one of the eyes is heading way down back towards 0. And there's 2 more koalas below it, showing the 2 different eyes there, one purple and one green. So what that shows you is that the vaccine, even when they weren't treated with antibiotics, their clinical disease, their redness, it's scarring their eyes, decreased. And equally, but I'll give you the bottom line, 6 out of the 7 koalas reacted very, very well. 1 didn't, which we'll try to work out why that was the case. And so the last picture, which is quite impressive, I think the koala on the left is one of the koalas that came into this trial. You can see its eyes, one right eye more at the left. And believe it or not, the picture on the right at the bottom corner is the same koala. Maybe it doesn't look the same, but it's the same koala. No antibiotics, vaccination alone, and the wildlife deaths at Australia's Wildlife Hospital. We're able to release that koala back into the wild. So let me just talk about our current work, and this is what I'm calling vaccine rollout trials. So rather than keep doing controlled trials that are very expensive, we've been using a vaccine and making it available to several wildlife hospitals, Australia's Wildlife Hospital and the RSPCA, 2 of their sites, Wakefield as well. And the way we're working there is half the animals get vaccinated and about half don't. And we wait and see whether animals come back to the hospitals with a second round of disease. Those figures there to show you that actually the vaccine is very safe. Only one animal had a little bit of a lump in that. These hundreds of animals have been vaccinated, and that was just at the injection site. And these are the numbers down the bottom. We've only just recently put these sort of numbers together because we now had hundreds of koalas vaccinated. So in the unvaccinated group, 34 koalas came back to the hospital. 24% of them had chlamydial disease again, and it was confirmed disease with disease symptoms and PCR. In the vaccinated group, 16 animals came back, but none of them had completely confirmed chlamydial disease. They didn't have signs and PCR positive. So that suggests that was a pretty good, impressive effect there. It's not 100% perfect. I'm not trying to suggest it is. There's one animal in the third line there that says Australia Zoo. Animal bounced around from Australia Zoo to RSPCA to Moggle, and it still failed its vaccination, even though it had been vaccinated. So a conservative estimate there is that the vaccine is at least 63% protective. It could be better than that, but we're sort of basing our efforts on conservative and statistically robust stuff. Finally, I want to finish with some data from the Moreton Bay region. And the reason for this is that we've been studying and using vaccine in parts of this population now over about 8 or nearly 10 years. So we can look across a broad period of time and ask the question, do we see the vaccine having an effect over this long period of time? The critical thing, I think, that's important for populations. So down the bottom, you'll see that a total of 681 koalas are monitored over this time. This is a large study. 206 of them were vaccinated and a lot not. So the question is, how well protected were those 206 koalas? So we asked 2 questions. Does the vaccine reduce the rate of associated deaths? So we're caring about the things that matter at the end of the day, deaths and disease due to chlamydia. So what we found, we're comparing then, how good does the vaccine need to be to be useful? So there's 2 population studies have been done, one by Rhodes. He suggested if you could reduce chlamydial disease mortality by 59%, that would actually stabilise populations where disease is a major factor. And also one by Craig that said as well, depending on how many animals you vaccinated, what level you needed to do. So what we did is we looked at those numbers over that time, and I think you can see on the right-hand side, they were unvaccinated, 8.5% died at the time over that long period of time, whereas by comparison in the vaccinated animals, only 3%. And the question is, which were those 3%? These are the 5 animals that we're talking about here. So down the bottom in red, you'll see that they're very old animals. And perhaps not surprisingly, old animals are a bit harder to protect with any vaccines. And the one at the top, 43 red, that's because that animal seemed to get chlamydial infections very soon, relatively soon after vaccination. So certainly in the blue, that one was a vaccine failure. But nevertheless, if you compare that to the unvaccinated group, we end up with a 65% reduction in death rate due to vaccination, which is now looking at across 200 animals that have been vaccinated. And here I've just put in what's called a survival probability curve, where people measure the effects. And so in yellow is the rate of death or reduction in survivability if you're not vaccinated in those hundreds and hundreds of koalas, and the blue one shows there's a very significant and important improvement on vaccination, a lot of koalas across a period of time. So where are we up to? We are partnering with a vaccine company to produce the vaccine, and we're at a pretty good stage there. They're already producing small amounts of the vaccine under the really high standards that are required. We're hoping to go through a registration process between now and the end of the year. We'll continue to roll out the vaccine in more hospitals, so Queensland, but also into New South Wales as well. Sort of finish this with recognising all the different people and the different groups that have supported the research over the period of time. So hopefully you're able to hear all that, and I apologise again for the technical challenges we had tonight. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter, and I'm glad we could troubleshoot that, and I really appreciate that you were able to troubleshoot also from your side, because I would have hated to miss your presentation, and quite the promising results from your vaccine trials. So the next and final presentation we have tonight is from Jeff Lundy-Jenkins, who is the director of the Queensland Department for Environment and Science. Jeff leads a team to develop, deliver, and support major projects and programs that aim to deliver conservation and biodiversity outcomes within Southeast Queensland. And today, Jeff will share the Queensland Government Southeast Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy and practical ways how we can all assist koalas in the Lockyer Valley and the greater Southeast Queensland region. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. And just want to also add my acknowledgement to the traditional owners on the land on which we're gathering tonight. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their ongoing connection to land, sea and country, and particularly their interests in koalas and koala conservation as we speak about koalas tonight. What I'll run through over the next 15 minutes, hopefully I'll keep to the 15 minutes, is some of the actions that are being implemented under the SEQ Koala Conservation Strategy and some of those partnership activities, some of which have already been highlighted through the previous presentations. I guess the focus on koalas is really as a consequence of ongoing decline in koala populations, and there's plenty of media coverage in relation to some of the impacts and the growth in southeast Queensland that's really impacting on our koala populations. And some of the drivers to that. So in southeast Queensland in particular, we're still facing an ongoing growth in human populations, and that's coming at the cost of habitat and other impacts on koala populations. So it's been a really strong driver for delivering and developing a comprehensive koala conservation strategy. So there's been a bit of a journey in terms of setting the scene for the development of this koala conservation strategy. In 2015, the University of Queensland did a comprehensive review and to demonstrate declines in koala populations in southeast Queensland. And that provided the impetus for the Queensland Government to set up a koala expert panel. And that expert panel then reviewed a range of data and reviewed a range of initiatives that had already been in place to try and support and recover koala populations. And it was that report and the work of the expert panel was pretty damning in terms of the consequence of that previous investment in koala conservation. And it found that despite significant investment and significant goodwill, koala populations had still continued to decline despite that investment. So there needed to be quite a significant change. So the expert panel provided specific recommendations to the Queensland Government with regards to action that was needed to address that decline and to seek to recover and grow koala populations in southeast Queensland. So from the expert panel report, there was a Queensland Government response to that, and the commitment within the response by the Queensland Government was to implement those actions. And that was about two key recommendations were to set up new koala protections. So it recognised that the previous protections and the planning legislation that was in place was still allowing koala habitat to be lost and developed. And there was a need to have a coordinated, comprehensive response to the threats to koalas. And that was in the form of the SEQ Koala Conservation Strategy. So those two measures essentially have been progressed to the extent that we now have new koala habitat protection framework. So in beginning of 2020, new legislation was brought into effect, which led to changes to the Nature Conservation Koala Conservation Plan, to the planning regulations, to the environmental offset regulation, and also to the vegetation management regulation. And the introduction of those was also underpinned by the introduction of new koala habitat mapping. So again, we went from having disparate, disconnected koala habitat mapping across southeast Queensland to having a single consistent approach to identifying and mapping that koala habitat, and that mapping then provided the basis for the introduction of new koala habitat protections. Oops, I've been impatient, so I went too far. So the new koala habitat mapping not only identified core koala habitat, but it also was used to identify koala priority areas. So the mapping identifies koala priority areas, koala habitat areas, also identifies koala habitat restoration areas. And so the koala priority areas are intended to provide areas that have increased protection. So under the new planning framework, the clearing and interference with koala habitat within a koala priority area is prohibited. There are exemptions to that, but it provides a much higher level of protection for the koala habitat within those koala priority areas. There are also identified within those koala priority as koala habitat restoration areas, and they're the areas that are identified as areas that previously supported koala habitat, but also would be suitable for future restoration. So they provide a guide for future investment in habitat restoration activities. The department is also now progressing another new type of mapping in terms of mapping threats to koalas. So there is now draft products which are koala threat maps, and we're looking to develop a koala threat priority area map. So that will identify where the highest levels of threats to koala populations exist, so that we can then intersect that mapping with our koala habitat restoration area mapping to again guide future investment in conservation programs. So, as I said, the Koala Conservation Strategy was launched in 2020. It outlines the Queensland Government's response to those recommendations from the Koala Expert Panel, and it sets about the most appropriate realistic actions to address the decline in South East Queensland koala populations, and seeks to focus efforts to areas where there's the highest likelihood of success. And that's really driven by that new mapping which identifies those koala priority areas and koala habitat restoration areas. There's some key targets set within the strategy, and those targets are aspirational and also big stretch targets. The initial targets that were set in the draft strategy, the feedback from the community and the feedback from local governments was, you're not going hard enough. So the targets that are now set are quite significant. So the targets are around stabilising koala populations in South East Queensland, about actually achieving a net gain. So it's not stabilising and maintaining. The target is to actually increase the area of total core habitat within South East Queensland. It's about seeking to commence restoration activities on 10,000 hectares of koala habitat, and a very targeted threat reduction campaign focusing on 10 programs within identified threat priority areas to support at least 25% reductions in disease, injury and mortality rates in those localities. So pretty significant targets have been set within that strategy. There are 6 action areas across the strategy, so they're focused around habitat protection, habitat restoration for koalas, threat management, improved mapping, monitoring, research and reporting, around community engagement, and partnerships and strategic coordination. And those last 2 shouldn't be underestimated, because the strategy itself really acknowledges that the Queensland Government can't do this on its own and is heavily reliant on the community for the role that they play, but also on partnerships to help deliver the outcomes within the strategy. So there's a significant focus both within the strategy and in some of the programs I'll talk about in terms of effectively partnering with other organisations to deliver the outcomes. After the first 2 years of the strategy, an annual report was published to look at progress in delivering some of those outcomes. And some of the highlights within that annual report are the increase in area and the level of protection afforded koala habitat. So a key one around the habitat protection was about those new planning regulations that were brought into effect to increase the level of protection of koala habitat. During some of the restoration projects, over 90,000 trees have been planted, restoring over 100 hectares of koala habitat in southeast Queensland. That, as I said, has been supported and directed by that new state-of-the-art koala habitat mapping that was introduced. There's been over 10.8 million invested in Southeast Queensland Wildlife Hospital Network since 2016, and that's a significant investment in supporting the rescue, care and then rehabilitation of sick and injured koalas across Southeast Queensland. There's over $600,000 awarded to applied research to support conservation of koalas. Some of the research that Dr. Timms talked about was supported by investment by Queensland Government. There's been $4.48 million to expand the Koala Habitat Restoration Partnership Program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that program. And again, that's the work that's been conducted by Queensland Trust for Nature and again was referenced previously. Last year we ran a Koala CoLab conference, which was a virtual conference to highlight a number of the work, both research work and on-ground work that was being done by different people in relation to koalas. And we're currently planning for a repeat of the Koala CoLab event this year as a commitment coming out of the strategy. And a further $550,000 was allocated to the project led by Griffith University. So the forums tonight and a number of the other activities that Griffith social marketing have been supported directly as a consequence of that investment by the Queensland Government to support Griffith working with local governments to co-design and implement a range of programs around community awareness, community engagement and mitigating threats. Just to focus on some specific activities that are being undertaken by the department that are relevant to the strategy. We now have a new koala assessment and compliance team. So with the introduction of those new planning controls, the department now has a formal role in the assessment and conditioning of development in koala habitat areas across southeast Queensland. So previously, again, this was spread across local government. This is now a state assessment process which is informed by a specific state code which sets out the types of criteria and the types of things that developers must meet in order to undertake development in areas containing koala habitat. We also have a stronger compliance and enforcement function in that, and those powers come through both the Planning Act and the changes in the Koala Conservation Plan. As I said, the Koala Habitat Restoration Partnerships Program is a very significant ongoing partnership with the Queensland Trust for Nature to deliver on-ground koala habitat restoration projects. To date, the Queensland Government has invested $4.96 million in that. There's a total of 6 projects were funded through the first expression of interest phase for that project, delivering restoration activities across 250 hectares. The most recent expression of interest has led to funding for a further 8 projects, which will restore a further 174 hectares of koala habitat. In last year's Queensland state budget, a further $9 million was identified specifically to support expansion of further koala habitat restoration programs. So part of that will fund an extension of the Koala Habitat Restoration Partnerships Program, but we're looking also to partner with Healthy Land and Water and a range of local governments to deliver specific targeted restoration programs. In terms of threat management, again, the strategy focuses on actions to reduce threats, including car strikes, disease, fire, climate change, and attacks by domestic and wild dogs. To date, there's been commitments in terms of trialling koala safety shields for installation on the M1. There's been field trials of vaccines, as illustrated by Professor Timms. We've certainly supported Griffith both in promoting and expanding the Leave It program, but also in their breeding season campaigns and some of the material that's been presented to encourage and promote awareness and different behaviours within areas containing koalas. And $6 million of new funding has been identified in last year's Queensland budget to support an expansion of those threat mitigation programs. So we recently hosted a workshop with all the 12 local governments from across southeast Queensland and a range of expert practitioners to look through what an approach to developing and implementing threat mitigation projects looks like. And we'll likely be, again, partnering with Healthy Land and Water to develop and deliver a program in a similar ilk to the Healthy Catchments type program that's delivered across southeast Queensland. Again, we play an active role in the rehabilitation space, so our Moggle Koala Rehabilitation Centre has operated over many years, but is now a very strong and active partner within that wildlife hospital network across southeast Queensland. In addition to the work just simply in rehabilitating sick, injured and orphaned koalas, we are also being more actively involved in the research work. So again, we've supported the vaccination trials that Peter spoke of previously. The department actually invested significant money in 2020 to restore refurbish the Moggle Koala Centre to bring it up to modern standards, and it's now a very modern and advanced facility. A core focus in our education and community engagement activities is through the Daisy Hill Koala Centre. We get about 120,000 visitors per annum through that centre. We've been working again with Griffith Uni to look at trying to deliver some of their educational messages and community awareness programs through the centre. So there's currently funding applications to the Australian Research Council to support investment in research to update how we reach the public and communicate some of those key messages. A couple of people have mentioned the sighting app, so we now have a koala sighting app on the Q Wildlife platform. So that's the platform that's used to deliver the Crocwatch sightings app. So again, we'd encourage you to download that. It's both on Apple devices and Android devices. Again, through that app, we're integrating some of the information that Griffith have gleaned from the public around how do you tell if an animal's sick or injured. So again, trying to integrate that education so that people that are making sighting reports are also aware of looking for animals with disease. That also links to how you refer and contact the wildlife hospitals. So again, it's speaking into that rescue and rehabilitation piece of work. The new, as I said, the new funding that was available will support expansion of the koala habitat restoration program on private and state land. It'll help targeted investment in threat reduction. We've recently announced some funding, further research funding, to go out to another 6 projects across Queensland universities to support knowledge gaps. This year we'll be funding activities under the banner of a First Nations Koala Action Plan to look at integrating First Nations aspirations and interests into the koala recovery program. Again, a key focus on community awareness and education. There's expansion of funding to support the Wildlife Hospital Network, and that also included some recent grants that were put out to support the broader carer network. So again, there were grants provided to support wildlife carers. The development of refinement of tools in terms of mapping and assessing koala habitat. So there's further and ongoing work there. And there's a project which is looking to expand the new mapping that was developed into the broader SEQ bioregion. So quite a big program of work through that expanded work. That total new investment was $24.6 million that was announced in last year's Queensland budget. So it's providing this impetus to increase the work that we're doing. Consistent with the other presenters, I think there's some key things that the community can do, and one of the key ones that I like to promote is have your say. And a lot of the community say, why aren't you doing more about koalas? And I think from the government's perspective, koalas are important, but the government also deals with a range of other things, and the extent to which we fund and respond to koalas is proportioned to the amount of voice that the community puts into their concerns around koalas. So both at state level but also at local government level, it's really important that if you've got concerns that they're expressed and that you have input into decisions around planning schemes and development and other things in your local area. Report koala sightings, because again that information helps us understand where koalas are and where we need to protect. It also helps us understand what are impacting on koalas. So again, report sick, injured and orphan koalas, support your local koala carers. They do a lot of fantastic work, purely voluntary, rely on donations and support. Change your driving behaviour, especially in breeding season. So again, that's already been promoted, and I think the messaging is now becoming very clear. Participate in Leave It, dog fests, koala collabs, and encourage other people in your community to do so. Join your NRM groups or catchment groups to assist with land management and rehabilitation. There are now so many different projects, and again we heard about some really successful projects tonight that people can join in and get more information on. Consider your property for private protected area. Again, one of the key focuses is not just on protecting state and local government land, but protecting private land in perpetuity. Report unlawful clearing. We rely very much on the community to dob in people that are doing the wrong thing, and we're currently progressing some really strong cases against people that are clearing, and we now have more teeth to be able to do that. So again, we rely on people reporting that, and use tools at your disposal like the Queensland Globe, like the sighting app and other things that are available. And there's a whole range of those that again will be promoted through the Griffith sites, but through some of the information on the department's websites. Thanks.
Just a couple of questions which touched on the same topic. Maybe Jeff, you can give some insights in terms of where to submit the koala sightings, because we obviously heard that it's quite important, but there are different apps out there in different ways. What's the best way for us to submit koala sightings? Does it matter if it's through Q Wildlife or iNaturalist? What's the best way and most beneficial way so the government can actually use it?
Ultimately, we would like to promote our app as being sort of the preferred way of lodging those, but what I can confirm is that the sightings that are submitted through other mechanisms are still collated by the Queensland Government and used by the Queensland Government. So certainly iNaturalist, the other platforms that are set up by CSIRO, I can't remember the name of that particular one, and also some of the local government platforms that have been set up. When we're reviewing our koala habitat mapping and doing our planning in terms of the threat mapping, we're getting that data from local governments, from the other people that are collecting that to inform that. The most important thing is that if there is a system that you're using, continue to use that system and submit that data. We'll continue to work with local governments to update the app and also to integrate it into citizen science programs. So one of the key things we want to do is not simply have the app being passive, but actually integrate it into programs so that in some areas we may in fact have, and I think we're stealing some of the promotional work that's been done in other states, but we may actually set up some weekends or periods in the year where we have great koala counts and we actually encourage people to go out into parts of the landscape where we don't have lots of sighting reports and get them to fill in the gaps. So almost copying off some of the successful things that have been done, particularly for birds in other programs.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for that. Next question is for Renee and Chris. So you were talking about that the tree planting is part of your koala conservation strategy. And the question is, are the free trees, native trees and specific koala food trees included? If so, is there an education sheet with the trees to indicate it's a koala food tree? The free trees that you provide, yeah.
Yeah, so the free tree program that we have is part of our Land for Wildlife program. And when you sign up to Land for Wildlife, you'll have Martin come out and do an assessment of your property, and he provides like a property management plan for your property, which includes what kind of trees are most suitable, what are the ones that are supposed to grow in that area, and yeah, he gives you a really comprehensive list of different types of plants to plant. And then you're able to order those through the free tree program and go and pick them up from 2 local nurseries.
Okay, great.
Can I add something?
Yes,
Sorry.
Sure.
What I was going to say is that the Queensland Trust for Nature Koala Habitat Restoration Partnerships program has also commenced having a free tree, and it's entirely focused on having koala habitat trees available, and we'll be expanding that when we extend that arrangement with Queensland Trust for Nature. So again, when we start to run more days in the different local government areas, there will be opportunities to get koala trees independent of that sort of Land for Wildlife and other things for landholders to, I guess, stick their toe in the water around replanting.
All right. Anyone else wants to add anything to the tree planting? No? Good. Diane, everybody loves the work Lucy is doing. The question that came up is the data that you have collected, is it published anywhere? Is it anywhere accessible? No.
Well, all of the records, sightings and scat finds are registered with WildNet. So in that sense, yes, the data's there, but in terms of publication, no.
All right. And one question for Cameron regarding the cost per hectare for replanting.
Well, that's a very good question. Probably a bit. Can't really recall the dollar per hectare for the planting, but for the original 4 hectares, our long-term target was to keep the whole project over 20 years under $1 million. Now, it might sound a lot, but for a zero discharge STP, that's actually a fairly good achievement. So the trees have been came up very good in the options analysis as a long-run, low cost for us. Tony, can you remember roughly what the... Yeah. Was it 20 or 30,000 hectare or something like that? Anyway, I think, yeah, there might be a list on that. The thing to remember for us, we need the trees to do the work for us, to use the water and the nutrients. So we have a very low target mortality rate, and we have quite aggressive tree performance standards with respect to growth at the 5-year contract handover from the forestry company that we contracted to deliver the trees. So it's probably a gold-plated solution for a reforestation project. And it's probably the most expensive that you would do, but it secures urban utilities licence compliance with its regulatory sewage treatment plant. And it probably guarantees that we're probably going to have one of the best forests with the water and the care and attention it gets in relation to care to keep them alive that you could probably get. So you do get benefit.
Okay, great. Jess.
I'll chirp in every time. I think there's probably some data available also through the work that both Queensland Trust for Nature have done, but also Healthy Land of Water have been delivering a major project on behalf of the Commonwealth Government, which has been seeking to restore, and that's around Flinders Peak. But I think they're also doing some stuff. What's the name of it? There's another part which is just here in Ipswich or Lockyer Valley, I think, that Grantchester. So they've also been delivering similar stuff in Grantchester. So I'm not sure that they have it on their website, but I think they did present at the Koala CoLab. So I think there's data within their Koala CoLab presentation around the costs per hectare that they were investing in that type of work.
probably just a quick comment. We planted the first one in the driest year on record. So the costs for the first 4 hectares was definitely more expensive in planting in the middle of the end of a triple La Nina event. So I think if you're doing planning in respect to reforestation, certainly look at your period, your first 5 years of what the climate's going to be, because to water 4 hectares or 1,600 trees for a year to keep them alive, or else they're going to be totally wiped out, isn't cheap.
All right. And Jeff, you encouraged people to have their say. What are some ways how people can actually have their say? To whom do they have their say?
Well, I guess, as I said, I think it's mostly to do with planning, input into planning processes, because I think the koala expert panel clearly identified that the ongoing decline of koala populations in southeast Queensland was intricately linked to the continued loss of habitat. And the loss of habitat was a consequence of development, and development is influenced obviously by planning laws, by planning overlays within planning schemes. So when there's opportunities to input into the review of the SEQ planning framework or your local government planning scheme, if you're passionate around protecting koalas, then I would encourage you to have input into the identification of conservation layers within those planning schemes and the protections of habitat within those schemes. There's also obviously opportunities that we're starting to develop with regards to the community having input into feedback on the koala habitat mapping. So there is an annual review of the koala habitat mapping. So another way people have their say is by making that data on koala sightings, but also providing data in relation to habitat that can help inform that annual review of the koala habitat mapping.
And one question perhaps to all of you, or whoever feels comfortable. Farmers are clearing land around Pittsworth, where koalas cling to a few trees. What can we do about this? I guess the question is, how do we balance agriculture with protecting and restoring koala habitat?
I've actually had to answer this question a number of times in letters, I guess, is that it has been an emerging issue, and it's grown in community interest as a consequence of koalas being listed as endangered. And a number of people obviously and rightly ask the question, if the koala's endangered, how come you can still clear in koala habitat? And I come back to the fact that there have been higher levels of protection put in place in southeast Queensland, but across the rest of Queensland, where koalas are still listed as endangered, there hasn't been any increase in those protections. And that's because the Queensland government, I guess, is balancing the requirements to provide for landholders to develop and productively farm their land against the balancing and competing interests of nature conservation and koalas. And at the moment, that response is still permitting a certain level of clearing within those areas. And the only change you'll get is where there's a change in government policy around that, and that comes as a consequence of the community saying, we value koala trees and koalas more than we value expansion of farming land or expansion of residential development in those landscapes. So I think the key thing is around what the community tells the government of the day is most important to them. There are certainly, again, the other side of that is I also encourage people to report when they see this type of clearing, because not all this type of clearing is actually happening lawfully. So, and we can only respond to unlawful clearing when we have clear evidence that it's occurred and people are willing to come forward and provide statements and evidence and support investigations and prosecutions in that space. And again, in some of those communities, people are happy to come forward anonymously, but not actually provide data or not be prepared to support those things. So if you're seeing the illegal activity, you need to, I guess, feel strongly enough about it that you come forward with reasonable evidence that allows the government agencies to actually investigate it and take action against people that are doing it illegally.
Well, we probably had that little bit of dilemma as a new landholder back in 2019, and we had I think it was a 130 hectare property. But there was a spot on that property, 7 hectares or 10 hectares, that was really prime for conservation activity. And probably the soil was fairly, the soil on that property is probably spent. It's been worked for a long time. So the trees was probably a fairly good option in that part of the farm. So I think there's got to be give and take across the landscape. And I think the opportunity for agriculture, if you do lose some land to conservation where there's really high value, is to move to more intensive agriculture. So that could be greenhousing. I think this will be a natural technology revolution at some point, but moving towards technology farming can help secure the yields of fruit and vegetables and everything else that we get. And it might allow freeing up for conservation activities on the prime parts of those farms where you get the best bang for buck.
You probably led me to think a little bit further around that as well. As I think the other side of this is that there is a perception that in some cases trees aren't compatible with sustainable farming, and the idea is you clear the land, you'll get more productive land. And I think that's something we need to do more education and information to landholders. And some of these restoration projects are actually establishing that as demonstrations on particular properties to demonstrate that we can replant koala trees and still productively farm that land. And in some cases we can productively farm it and be more sustainable if we've actually put trees back in the landscape. And I think those small demonstration properties serve to illustrate to other landholders and then encourage other landholders that you can in fact retain trees, plant trees, and still maintain the productivity in an agricultural sense.
Can I suggest too that from a landholder perspective, there's a couple of issues there. It's left to us to report, fair enough, when we see people doing clearing that we think is illegal. That makes it difficult for the landholders to be dobbing in neighbours. Secondly, it doesn't look good to other landholders who probably aren't doing the right thing but don't want to get involved with us because we might dob on them. There's that, we may be actually causing people to not come to us. And I really would argue very strongly for, instead of demonstration sites and so forth, the government really needs to put its money or its mouth where its money is, or whatever. They have recognised biodiversity corridors. We need to be looking at demonstration sites that are corridors or large tracts, ecological networks across large landscapes. One-offs here and there, it's just not cutting it. And until we kind of link the Veg Management Act with that thinking, that strategy of landscape-wide conservation, we're just not going to get anywhere. $26 million, the best indicator of that is a turnaround in the current trajectory. And if you can't get that, all these measures are for naught. And we really need to be looking landscape-wide, corridor, bite the bullet, show some leadership, acknowledge the corridors, invest in the corridors. And that's even if you have to sell the message to begin with, as a voluntary thing, a biosphere, what Noose has done, what they do in the Lake District in England, it's a biosphere. Yes, agriculture occurs, but we also are about biodiversity. This biosphere, brand it, promote it. That's what we need. Because it's almost like, we have landholders here, excuse me for pointing it out, 80-year-old landholders. We're good stewards. We don't need to plant trees. We have lots of trees. We've got lots of weeds. We need help. We need to draw a line in the sand and protect what's good, the Bradley method. Work on the best first and then move outwards. You get a lot of support for farmers, and you get a lot of support for restoration, planting, but we fall between the gaps. The ones who actually have the habitat, and we just can't keep up with maintaining it. We are good stewards. We need recognition. So, there's a whole lot of things that I think are being overlooked currently.
Some of the statistics I put up did focus on planting trees, but it's fair to say that both the Healthy Land and Water Project and the QTFN project are also looking at natural regeneration. So that's around weeding and fire management to encourage the existing habitat that is on those properties. And the manner in which properties are targeted is strategic. So it is based on that koala habitat mapping. It is based on corridor mapping to inform that. One of the key challenges we have is attracting sufficient landholders to actually take on those types of projects. And that's where I see that the need for education and that promotion around the fact that trees are a good thing and those habitats are a good thing and they don't compete with production. That's an important message we need to get across to actually encourage greater numbers of landholders in those strategic areas to get involved. Because at the moment, it is spots in the landscape, albeit that they're in those strategic locations, they are still spots. And it's about joining those dots together in a more comprehensive way. So I totally agree with that point, but I think we are trying in that space, but we still need to obviously understand landholders better. And I think they also need to understand what we're trying to achieve and how that the two things aren't mutually exclusive, but they can be complementary.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I thought that deserved also clapping, I think. And I think that's that's a good point to end this conversation tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you all for coming and presenting. Thank you, Professor Timms, joining us online. And we will definitely continue this conversation. So I'm looking forward to the next time. Thank you.